tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take
no room left for Mexico or for Canada? No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow. It's going to be very costly for people to take advantage of this country. They can't come in and steal our money and steal our jobs and take our factories and take our businesses and expect not to be punished. And they're being punished by tariffs.
That's in part how U.S. President Donald Trump is justifying the application of those punishing tariffs that he initially threatened a number of weeks ago. A month ago, they were put on pause for 30 days. And now he says, as of this afternoon, in just over 6 hours' time, they will come into effect. The federal government is promising, to respond with counter tariffs, though an exact timeline on when those come into effect is still to be determined. There are a number of ministers meeting with the Canada-U.S. Council on Parliament Hill as we speak. I believe we have the live shot inside there. We continue to wait to see if any of them come out and say something about what exactly Canada's response will look like beyond that package of counter tariffs to the tune of $155 billion. But of course, there are still 6 hours to go until midnight. And though the president is promising to enact those tariffs, he has said things like that before in reverse course. Let's talk about this with our front bench, the way in which different levels of government and the federal government, of course, will navigate this moving forward. With me this evening, former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne. Dan Moulton, he's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers is vice president at Oyster Group. He worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. Kathleen Monk is the former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk & Associates. And Laura Stone rounds us out this evening. She's a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Been a while since we're all together. I guess tariffs brought like the country together, has brought the original five back to the screen. And I'm glad that you're all making the time. Thank you so much. Laura, you're in Washington tracking all of this. Tell me a bit about your initial impression of what Donald Trump is saying. The thing that really stood out to me is they're saying it's about the border, but he clearly, laid out bare what he hopes happens because of these, which is the movement of manufacturing to the U.S.
Yeah, that was quite striking because we had the Commerce Secretary over the weekend talking about how Canada has made improvements on the border, but they were simply unsatisfied with what has happened with the fentanyl trafficking. And of course, Canada has put forward statistic after statistic showing how small the portion of fentanyl is from this country, I was going to say, but I'm in the U.S., from Canada going into the U.S. truly is. So it was never really about these issues, it seems. I think this has always been Mr. Trump's play, right, to bring manufacturing and specifically auto jobs, which he also talked about in his availability today, in his announcement today. He said, we want to bring auto plants back here and make cars in the United States. He doesn't care how integrated the manufacturing sector is between Canada and the United States. I think that, at this 11th hour, with him kind of closing the door on anything more that Canada can do at this stage, shows that Canada is not negotiating with a logistical partner. This is not a fair negotiation between Canada and the United States at this point. He doesn't want to have a negotiation. He wants to put into place these tariffs. And so now we're moving forward to the response. And I think the response is what everyone is now focused on, as you mentioned in the intro, at the different levels of government and between the different political parties now, is going to be who is best placed to respond to the Trump administration's tariff threats.
To Laura's point, clearly it's not a negotiation in good faith. So I wonder, Kathleen, what that does for the way in which we navigate this, whomever's at the, steering the ship, as far as our response. For the past 30 days, they've poured it all into the border. If it's not about the border, do we stop responding to things that aren't factual in the way in which we're being characterized? Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting over the last 30 days is we've seen that whoever becomes the next political leader of the Liberal Party and the next prime minister, if a federal election does happen, that they have Canadian support. That we have seen Canadians move out in record numbers, not buy U.S. products, really take umbrage with how President Trump is treating not only Canada, but other global leaders. And so what's unique about the situation position now that wasn't just a month ago or 6 weeks ago. Was all of our politicians, municipal, provincial, federal, have Canadians on their side, and they can move quickly as a result of that. This is going to trigger, unfortunately, likely a recession in Canada and also a Trump session in the United States. In fact, as you probably are aware, the Atlanta Federal Reserve has indicated a modeling that shows that even the U.S. economy is going to suffer potentially up to a 3% drop in the first quarter of this year as a result of all the instability, unpredictability that Trump has injected into the economy. And that's having real effects. And this is going to impact, it's going to be borne on the back of workers, both in the U.S. and in Canada, who are going to pay the price of this tax, which is a tariff, but it's really a tax on things. And Trump's going to realize and have that blowback. Maybe it's going to take 2 years, the next, midterm elections, but that he hasn't addressed the biggest issue for Americans, which is, in fact, the economy.
Well, the markets, all right, we don't even have to look through the end of the quarter. The markets tonight, as Amanda Lang was pointing out earlier in the show, took a hit this afternoon and obviously will be very volatile through the next 12, 24 hours, 36 hours. There they are right there, the S&P and the Dow as well, both seeing significant drops. I wanted to play, Shakir, before I get to you, a clip from Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who was on MSNBC just last hour responding to this. He's making very specific threats about where Canada is prepared to go in response. Let's take a listen in.
If he wants to destroy our economy and our families, I will shut down the electricity going down to the U.S. And I'm telling you, we will do it. It's unfortunate. I would rather ship you more electricity, ship you more critical minerals. I want to ship you more energy, more potash to keep your farmers going, and uranium that you use for your nuclear power. It comes through from Saskatchewan over to Ontario, and it's going to be a massive, massive problem.
So, Shakir, throughout January, there were some differences, particularly among the provinces, about how far the response should go, whether it should include blocking off energy exports, things like that. Do you expect there to be more coalescing around the response, or do you think that those divisions will persist if, in fact, midnight comes and the tariffs are applied?
I think for provinces like Ontario, even Quebec, they've been pretty okay with, stop sending resources to the United States if tariffs come into play. Might be a little bit of a different dynamic in Alberta, and for good reason. But I think someone like Premier Ford has honestly been the most forceful in terms of what he's willing to do to counter Trump's tariffs. My only worry is that, being aggressive back against Trump might just cause him to ratchet up the tariffs against Canada. He seems like he's willing to absorb some domestic pain in the U.S. to kind of achieve his goal, which, as Laura said, it's not about fentanyl, it's not about the border. It really is manufacturing. And I would say at one point, I try to put myself in a more neutral position and try to see what's going on in the United States. And before I came on this panel, if Trump's goal of tariffs and threats is about bringing investment to the United States, frankly, it is actually working, right? I think the announcement they had today on the presser was $100 billion into the U.S. for semiconductors. Honda announced recently they're going to take their Honda Civic hybrid and manufacture it in Indiana instead of Mexico. And you have some battery technology companies that are contributing $6 billion over the next decade to the U.S. to manufacture in the U.S. I'm not condoning tariffs. I know how bad it's going to be in Canada. But if the tariff threat is to bring in investment to the United States, it's actually working in Donald Trump's benefit. And I think the only saving grace that we have, if businesses stand firm and say, you know what, we're not going to relocate. We're going to stay in Canada. We're going to stay in Mexico, and we're going to ride this out. But so far, it's not looking good.
The delineation, I think, Dan, would be that he's using the threat of tariffs to force action on those fronts. Now it will be the application of them, which could also force action on that front, but also will have an impact on consumers in the States.
And if he does, right, all the comments that we saw from the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, over the weekend and earlier today would indicate that Trump won't bring forward tariffs of the full 25%, that there is still a lot of room for negotiation despite his comments this afternoon. The president, when he's in front of the cameras, has a lot of message discipline. He's going to say, tariffs are great. They're the best thing. They're going to help America. He's going to bring them forward. And they're going to be at the most extreme end of the spectrum. He hasn't done that yet. He has threatened it. He has kicked them out. He has threatened it and then, not brought anything forward. And so I think there still remains to be seen whether or not Canada experiences the kind of tariffs that have been threatened and were threatened again today. I will give credit to the Canadian government's response. I think they've recognized that threats enough aren't something to react to, that they need to see things written down. They need to see executive orders actually brought into action before they can lay out their response. And I think that's wise. I don't think as a country we should be responding to every moment of this roller coaster ride. We should look for definitive direction from the White House, that things that they're actually going to do, and respond to that accordingly. I'm not sure jumping every time Donald Trump says so is the right strategy for Canada.
Okay, very quick. I have like 4 minutes. I want to do one round on the Liberal leadership race because this is the last time we meet before there is an actual leader. Laura, I'll start with you. You were grilling Mark Carney Friday night when he was at that event in Oakville about the way in which he represented himself after the debate, how much of a role he played in the decision of a big company, Brookfield Asset Management, to move its headquarters from Canada to the United States. He admitted to you he should have been more precise. Is this having any impact on his campaign, do you think?
And I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else on Friday night, Vashi, I'll tell you. I think, look, I think that, you know, the issue here isn't specifically on Brookfield, although there are people, obviously, in the business community, conservatives are very invested in that issue. And I think, you know, he owes the public a straight answer on it. And we didn't get that on Friday. You know, we got a lot of deflection and kind of turning away in technical language, but we didn't quite hear what he had to say specifically on that point. I think kind of the issue is here that Mr. Carney doesn't feel like he owes the public an explanation. He doesn't feel like he owes clarity on things that he doesn't want to talk about. He wants to frame things in a certain way and push forward his campaign. And I'll say, I watched his preamble speech with Anita Anand there, and he has gotten quite skilled at speaking in public, speaking to supporters, kind of building up his new kind of slogan, I suppose, although he doesn't like the word slogan, but about, you know, building in Canada. And he's kind of got the electioneering down pat. I think kind of just on the accountability piece, I think that this will be an issue for him, particularly not so much in the Liberal leadership race, but as we transition to a general election, when he will have to face the public and the media, and he'll be put in the hot seat and have to be accountable for his policy decisions and choices.
I've got 1 minute for each of everybody else. Dan looks like he wants to jump in right away, so I'm going to go straight to him. Dan, go for it.
Well, you know, look, Vassy, I think the leadership is going to come to a conclusion on Sunday, as you say. It certainly looks as though Mark Carney is very well positioned to win that race. I'll be there on Sunday. I'm sure I'll see you there and look forward to seeing the final outcome. But Laura's right. He's going to start facing a tougher ride on the other side of that, particularly if we get into an election right away. That is an unfamiliar environment to him. Politics is new to Mark Carney, and I think we're seeing some of that play out in real time. But I'm also seeing a lot of Canadians take a great deal of interest in the stability he seems to be bringing to our public conversation, a very different outsider approach that is, looking at the polling, clearly resonating with a lot of people in this country. And should he have an election in the near future, I think will be a plan that is put in front of Canadians and will continue to resonate, frankly.
Stephen Harper, Shakir, released a letter today basically calling into question the way in which Mr. Carney has kind of characterized his own role in the 2008-2009 crisis. Mr. Carney's campaign responded. We'll put that section up in just a moment. Your take on that?
Yeah, I think this just fits into what Pierre's team is saying, right? Carney's a guy who, you know, is either two-faced, embellishes his resume, or just doesn't speak frankly and tell Canadians the truth. And I mean, what Harper is saying is he's clearly embellishing his role in the financial crisis. I think you'll see the Conservatives kind of push harder on that narrative to, you know, let Canadians know that he's not really as trustworthy as you think he is. And despite what Dan might think in terms of the polling, I mean, again, the guy's a blank slate. We'll see when he actually faces a fire of opposition leaders if he can stand up to that, because he's having trouble right now. He's answering very basic questions about his resume, about his past experience with media that are not really grilling him. It's going to change quite a bit after March 9th.
I mean, Laura's grilling. I'm not sure what you mean.
He couldn't answer that question.
Yeah, Laura did
couldn't answer that question.
I got 30 seconds left. The last word goes to Kathleen. We just put up the response from Carney's campaign, which is essentially, if I can encapsulate it, like, this shows that they're worried about us.
Yeah, normally you see in an actual election campaign, you kind of pull out the big guns, the elder statesmen, the former prime ministers as your clincher in the final days of the campaign. So it is remarkable that, in fact, Pierre Poilievre has had to call on Stephen Harper to almost be a validator even before the writ is dropped. But listen, Laura's right. He's got to answer those hard questions, but Party will not be the first politician that has dodged questions. Every politician has
what are you
dodged
talking
questions.
about?
You know, I mean, Pierre Poilievre have been dodging questions on private health care, on trans rights, on everything for months, if not years. So this is not new in politics.
Also, Jagmeet
Pierre
Singh
won't be
has
the
done
Prime
yes
Minister in a
lately.
week.
Exactly. Everyone, all of them.
Yeah, fair point, everyone. Okay, I got to leave it there. I'm right out of time. I appreciate you guys making time for a great discussion. Great to have you all back. Laura Stone, Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, and Kathleen Monk.